Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, following the official opening of the annual meeting of the Global Future Councils by Professor Schwab and Minister Gergawi, a warm welcome to the opening plenary, the opening discussion, the opening dialogue of the summit. I'm Mirek Dušek, I'm with the World Economic Forum, and I'm pleased to be joined here by distinguished leaders, thought leaders, who I will introduce in a little bit. You saw their names before on the screen. But what we will do is we will try to set the stage a little bit for our work together in the 30 Global Future Councils that are gathered here over the coming 2 days. But even more importantly, you will be weaving in insights and nuggets from the body of work that's been created over 2 years. So we are at a culmination point of a 2-year period for the current Global Future Councils. On top of that, as Professor Schwab mentioned in his introduction, we are building on an even bigger body of work. We're really excited to be really working with the UAE for so long, 15 years of collaboration where we have this network of knowledge, first under the banner of the Global Agenda Councils and now under the banner of Global Future Councils. Professor Schwab and Minister Gergawi already set the stage in terms of the context, what is at stake. You mentioned, Professor Schwab, the different transformations that are driving this transition to the intelligent age. I don't know if you would agree, but many people think that it also then connects to how we work with knowledge. So we have playbooks, we have certain catalogs of knowledge, but a lot of people would say that those are not fit for purpose anymore, and that's why it's so important that we are able to renew that muscle, renew that body of knowledge to be able to really shape the future proactively. And it is also against headwinds. We are, and we also touched upon it, the one age is the intelligent age, but we are also looking at a scenario where we could be in an age of fragmentation. We are seeing fragmentation in the global economy, and that's also seeping through the knowledge space, if you will. As you know, ideas are contested. We are seeing also decreasing collaboration in research and development in certain areas for geopolitical reasons. And then there is this issue of how much sight you have of ideas. We are consuming knowledge and ideas through a lot of technological platforms, and maybe there are things that are hidden from view, out of sight. How do we address that? But as I said, I'm joined by an august panel of leaders, so let me introduce them. A warm welcome to Omar Al-Olama, Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence, Digital Economy and Remote Work Applications of the UAE. You are also a young global leader, and you have many other responsibilities here, but a warm welcome to you, Minister. Also a warm welcome to Jane Burston. You are Chief Executive Officer, Clean Air Fund in the United Kingdom, also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. A warm welcome. Warm welcome to Masoud Ahmed, President Emeritus at the Center for Global Development in the United States. Warm welcome. I should also say you were a long-standing director for the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia at the IMF. So you're well known also in the region here. And in terms of introduction, last but definitely not least, Tolu Oni, Clinical Professor of Global Public Health and Sustainable Urban Development at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. You're also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. A warm welcome to you. So I'll start with AI. I'll start with you, Minister. It was also in the conversation then between Professor Schwab and Minister Gergawi. I think it was said that it is a driver of this intelligent age. We talk about the intelligent age as being defined by the whole sets of these technologies, but is really the wake-up call around particularly Gen AI that I think is capturing minds and can be a turbocharger of that. You were quite early. I mean, in your portfolio, you already got the title of Minister of AI. I think you were the first one in the world. And in general, I think the UAE is considered to be a pioneer in terms of thinking how to harness AI for the economy and society. So help us understand kind of the UAE approach to AI, and not only in terms of regulation, which obviously a lot of people are trying to figure out around the world, but also you have these big announcements here. So there's a lot of investments in, for example, AI infrastructure. We've seen the Microsoft deal that's been announced recently, and talking to people here, there is a lot going on. On the infrastructure side, you have an LLM that you've developed here, etc. So help us understand the UAE approach to AI.
Thank you, Merrick. And honestly speaking, it's a very difficult act to follow Professor Schwab and Mr. Gregawi. So excuse the nervousness that we feel here on stage. I also want to make an official plea and request. I think I'm going to change my title from Minister of Artificial Intelligence to Minister of the Intelligent Age. We'll see if that request comes through. I think when we actually look at the UAE's ambition towards artificial intelligence, can I maybe set the context here for those of you who are coming here for the first time, for those of you who have just discovered the UAE and its ambition recently? You need to understand where our people came from. And one of the things that I do, I actually like to give people as a gift, maybe as a small artifact, something called the khayzarana, which is a stick, a walking stick, that some of our founding fathers used to carry and use, and the people around this region used to have. And it was a very good utility tool that you used to use. And people ask me, why do you give us this stick? You know, what is the meaning of this? And my answer is, imagine if you were in a land, if you were in a country, where the forefathers and the generation that was alive back then used to draw a line in the sand using this stick, and a road would be built in that place within a short amount of time, where they would draw a map of a city on that sand, and that city would come on, emerge out of the sand. We have lived in a miraculous age, an age where we were able to imagine and maybe design on just sand, and then see that being executed in front of us. And that gives us ambition that at times can be seen as audacious. We dream much bigger than our size. We dream much bigger than even our current resources. And some people think that this is impossible, and we are able to make it happen. To understand our vision on AI, the President of the United Arab Emirates, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, came and said something that people found extremely odd on a platform in the UAE called the World Government Summit. He said, we want to celebrate the exporting of the last barrel of oil. In most people's viewpoint, you are an economy that depends on oil. Saying that you want to celebrate exporting the last barrel means that you want to move to a new age, but means that you want to take big, bold bets today. And His Highness's vision was, we want to be a society that is built on beyond just natural resources, but built on human talent, built on new systems and technologies that are going to shape the future, and are able to move much faster than others. Since 2017, I think people thought that artificial intelligence was a gimmick. We moved and invested in infrastructure, whether it's compute infrastructure. We've put the investment platforms in place. We've also upskilled the human capital in the UAE. So we have over 400 government officials today that have gone through a master's degree equivalent level of training, where they understand the ethics of AI, what AI is good for and what it isn't good for. And also their actual job is to ensure that they deploy AI effectively in their government. And then finally, what makes the UAE different is the UAE has the variety of the population to make our AI systems truly global. So when you deploy something in the UAE, you don't have the local biases that other places have. We have the velocity of our infrastructure, allowing the velocity of data to go into these systems and to come back from these systems. And we're able to also deploy AI much faster than others, but we need to do this responsibly. One good example of AI being done right, and I mentioned this to many people, if you look at coming into the UAE, if you use the smart gates, which is in our airport in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, you don't even have to pull your passport out. You walk through the airport seamlessly. You don't even have to interact with a single officer, and you're able to go to your next destination without waiting in line. That is AI done right, in a very secure environment, and that ensures that people's quality of life actually increases. Our focus is AI for quality of life improvement. That is what we're trying to do here, and I think that this is going to be a role model example for the rest of the world.
Thank you. Maybe just a quick follow-ups. Obviously, there is also this question of how AI is used in geopolitical rivalries and how people compete for supremacy of AI when they think that then it can help them with their national competitiveness in the future. How is that impacting a country like the UAE? There is a geopolitical competition around AI. Is that impacting your work in any ways?
So there is always going to be tension, and especially as these models become more advanced and as the systems become more important and integral for sovereignty, we are going to see these conflicts. And as a country, by virtue of our position and by virtue of our history, we are a country that depends on globalization. So you just look at the population, you walk on the malls and you see people from every walk of life, from every corner of the planet, coming, living and building in the UAE. And as a local market, we're not a very big market. Our market depends on being able to work with the rest of the world. So we understand that these conflicts are going to happen. We understand that they're going to affect us. But our ambition is, first, to control our fate. We want to build AI systems in the UAE and export them to the world. We do not want our fate to be dependent on external parties trying to give us what we are going to use in the future. Second, we want to be trusted partners for all the different players in the world. And that will mean compromise at times, but we want to ensure as well that we are able to play the role of the bridge. The UAE has always been the bridge of East and West, and has always been the bridge of North and South. I think that will continue to be true. And then finally, there is a value add that the UAE brings to the table, which is you're able to deploy one system in the UAE and localize it to every single geography in the world. You will have people from different cultures being able to customize your tool to be able to export it. At one point of time, the technology trend that we saw was you start a company in Palo Alto or in London or in certain geographies, and then maybe open an international office in every single block and expand gradually. A new trend that we're seeing, which is actually quite interesting, is you see a company starting in India, in Chennai, for example, or in Palo Alto, or in London, and their second international office becomes Dubai or the UAE in Abu Dhabi. And they're able to serve the whole world from this one market because they're able to hire the talent that will localize it, they're able to fine-tune and improve, and they're able to attract talent from different geographies to create a very robust team. And I think that is an advantage that will allow our partners to see the value that we bring to the table and help us as well build with them.
Thank you. And maybe just one quick question, a quick answer as well, if you can. You are part of that UN panel that was advising the Secretary General on the Global Digital Compact, and some people see that as a success now that we have, or at least it was announced and agreed by nations that we would have a body at the UN that would be looking at the scientific evidence around the state of AI, both in terms of opportunities and risks. So congratulations on that success and on being part of that panel. Help us understand, is this, you think, the end station where we would get with international collaboration on AI, or do you think other things will follow?
On the contrary, I think we're now able to start. For the last 7 years, the conversation that I've been having with governments and international organizations is people are saying, we don't know where to start. We don't know what to do. Now my answer is, we have a document, we have a roadmap. It's time for us to roll up our sleeves and work together to achieve it.
So, sky is the limit.
Let's do it.
Perfect. Thank you. Moving to Tolu Oni, clinical professor of global public health and sustainable urban development at the University of Cambridge. So really shifting gears to public health. We mentioned that actually the leitmotif, also the raison d'être for this gathering of experts to exist is really to look at things in an interdisciplinary way, to drive, to look at things in a system with a systems view. Public health, obviously, we've had fragilities forever, but for a lot of people, COVID was, of course, a big wake-up call, and so now there is, and rightly so, renewed interest in figuring out how do we get better health outcomes and reduce fragilities in public health across markets. Mm-hmm. And you have some interesting research I've seen looking at how much of those health outcomes can be really determined by treatment care overall, and how much of it is actually socioeconomic determinants and contributing factors? Help us understand what you're working on in that regard, please.
Thanks, Mirek. Yes, so you're right, the pandemic really brought health to the fore and also helped people understand what an epidemiologist was. People used to think I was a skin doctor when I said epidemiologist before. Now everyone knows what that is. So the key thing I want to tease out there is often when we think about health, when we think about creating health, we think about healthcare. Right? But the reality is that we know that over 80% of factors that influence our health lie outside of healthcare. They lie in the social and the environment, in the economic determinants of health. So they lie in the environments that shape where we live, how we move, what we eat, the air we breathe. And so when we start thinking about addressing health, despite the fact that we know this, and actually data from WEF has shown that addressing and significantly reducing the burden of disease and pushing societies towards being healthier, more productive, can add $12 trillion to the global GDP by 2040. But then when we talk about how to do this, we think healthcare. And we absolutely need transformations in healthcare. But that accounts for 20% of what is driving our population health. So now my question is, when we think about innovations in health, how can we ensure that we're also thinking about innovations in those upstream determinants that actually play a much more critical role? And in that sense, in terms of what we can do about it, if we think about the public sector, I can think about the private sector. So in the public sector, I work at the city level, and I often say the best ministers of health are mayors of cities. So you talked about changing your title. Ensuring you have a health portfolio, not just in the healthcare sector, but actually in if you're doing anything that influences environments, that influences transport, that influences housing, that influences food environments, that influences the ways people move, you're a health professional, actually. And how do we ensure that our indicators are aligned? I really enjoyed the provocation at the opening panel of why is it that we have these advancements and yet they're not connecting to significant advancements in societal, in the way we operate in society? And I would argue a key aspect is that we're not aligning our transformations and our innovations to optimize health. So that would be a really critical one. And in the private sector, we know, given the cost that I just said, how can we ensure this is not a nice to have? How can we ensure that even within the corporate sector, how is health being centered in those spaces? And this is not just about employee health. Having an industry or having business activity in a particular town or neighborhood or city, are we asking, how is this neighborhood healthier because we operate here? This is how we need to start thinking. So we have this business sustainability principles. What if we had health principles that business can incorporate, that they can incorporate into how they work, but also their wider impact in society? So this is how we have to start thinking about innovations. And I do think digital transformations, if we frame it in that context and not just around healthcare, digital transformations can play a role in improving outcomes.
Thank you. If you can expand on that a little bit, I know you've been doing a lot of work on the role of data in driving positive outcomes. Help us understand, you also have this concept of data solidarity. Help us understand a little more the role of digital and public health.
Yeah. So in that context, we've talked about social determinants, environmental determinants. I do think we have to start talking about digital determinants of health. Right, so digital transformations can be transformative in creating long-term health benefits, but it's really important that in order to do that, we have to think differently in how we do that. So at the moment, firstly, a lot of it is focused on healthcare, and we miss the opportunity to think about how can digital transformations actually advance all of the other over 80%, by the way, factors that influence our health. But also critically, how we can shift our systems from being data extractive and focus more on control of data to one that is a system of data solidarity, which has at its core building a culture of justice and building a culture of equity, thinking about how we decentralize and democratize that process of collecting data. So it's about who is collecting data, what data is being collected, who has access to the digital capacity to do that, who has the digital literacy to do that, who has access to the data that is being collected, not just about their data, but collective for their society. And if we can think differently about that, then we would be in a different place to where we are now.
No, thank you. I think it's very important. I know you are doing different pilots, really on the ground work on that front. Maybe you can mention a few, but also then how can we scale this? So what would it take that we can really scale this digital aspect? And particularly, I know you were based in South Africa for a long time. Now you're in the UK, but I think you work a lot with African economies. So what would it take to really be able to make that transition to that future? Is it funding? Is it the international architecture? We just talked about a new UN agency. Are we equipped architecturally to drive those outcomes?
Mm-hmm. I would say we need to be asking ourselves, we've talked about different measures of intelligence. One of the things that we haven't talked about is collective intelligence or social intelligence. Talking about democratizing data collection, one of the things that we have done, and I work predominantly on the African continent. I'm Nigerian. We talk about youth, but on the continent where 60% of people are under 25. I'm sorry, but if you're not working with youth, I don't know who you're working with. You're working with a minority, right? So we actually talk about the majority demographic, and there is a potential to harness that potential. So one of the things that we've done is looked at how we can use digital technology to put in the hands of this majority demographic the ability to collect information about the environments and to use that information to drive accountability. So we use tech-enabled citizen science, so they can collect data about the air quality, data about health risks, climate risks, and use that to drive advocacy, use that to enhance their participation in decisions that shape the futures of their cities. So that is kind of one example. When we talk about democratizing data, that's kind of things, knowledge creation, that's one of the things we talk about. But that needs to scale. And actually, when we talk about urban infrastructure, I talk about digital infrastructure, right? How can we lay the pipeline for the kind of digital infrastructure that ensure that these kind of initiatives are not, oh, that's a cute little thing you're doing there in Lagos, but actually they're scalable so that we can equip and connect this majority demographic that are much more digitally savvy, by the way. And the other advantage of engaging them early is that we know from a health perspective, there's a life course aspect. So shaping the air they breathe now, shaping the environments and how they move now, has huge dividends to be paid in terms of the health later. So I think democratizing data collection, but also connecting that digital infrastructure so that we're actually building global collective intelligence is critical.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Jane Burston, Chief Executive Officer, Clean Air Fund in the UK. We mentioned the intelligent age. I mentioned also a plausible scenario of an age of fragmentation. And so climate and nature, and you've been in this field really with different entities throughout your career, but just I think it's right there because it's on one hand, obviously, when it comes to technologies, and we're not saying, of course, that this is panacea, but you are seeing huge advancements in energy technologies. You see these all advanced energy technologies. You are seeing, of course, also the role of data and tech around just how to help us with addressing climate change overall. So that promise is there. And then you see this fragmentation, particularly social fragmentation, and to a certain degree geopolitical, but mainly social fragmentation around kind of the goal. And so now we see in certain societies, people are questioning the momentum in terms of how we are actually getting to net zero. So help us understand, why do you think that is? And are there things that from your vantage point we can do about it to make sure we can live up to Paris and get us back on track? Many people think we are way off track for 1.5.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we are seeing a huge backlash now in many places around the world on climate change policy and climate action. And I think that's increasing as people are struggling in their everyday lives, and they're struggling to see the benefit of climate action in their everyday lives. You mentioned I worked in various fields, and one of the roles that I had was as head of climate science in the British government. And as head of climate science, one of the things that I invested a lot in was attribution science. So being able to say, as I'm delighted to see now, when things like the hurricane just hit the US last week, weather forecast and newsreaders talking about the impact that climate change has had on the intensification of hurricanes. So people can see right in that moment, not 2 years later or 3 years later when there's a peer-reviewed publication about it, but right then and there, as they're witnessing these events, as they're experiencing them, what climate change is doing and can do in their everyday lives. But I think we also need to think about the positivities, and I was struck by the hands in the room to Professor Schwab's question about do people see a positive future, and the fact that you mentioned many people don't. I think that when a lot of people talk about climate action, what they're talking about is this 1.5 degree goal and our collective responsibility to meet it. And they're not talking about the economic benefits, the quality of life benefits that people will be experiencing soon in their day-to-day lives. There was a survey that is run by the British government every single year on public attitudes to climate change. And I know that Yale does one for a number of different countries. Many countries run their own. And what we've seen in the UK for 2 decades now is that most people are somewhat or very concerned about climate change, and they have been for 2 decades. Like more than 2/3 of people somewhat or very concerned about climate change. But when you look at their behaviors, it doesn't match up. There's maybe 10 or 15% of people who are changing their behavior on a day-to-day basis because of climate change. Now, the rest of those people who've said that they're concerned, they do care. It's not that they're lying when they're responding to this survey. It's just that it's not the kind of thing that it's easy to keep in mind when you're making your everyday decisions. You're trying to get food on the table, you're trying to get your kids to school, you're maybe working a couple of jobs, you're worrying about a lot of things. Climate change is in the list, but it's not in the list today whilst I'm figuring out what kind of transport to use, whilst I'm at the supermarket doing my weekly shop. So I think one of the things that I see as something that we need to do much more of is making the sustainable actions the cheaper and the easier ones. So we don't have to keep thinking of raising climate change up people's priority lists. So we don't have to keep talking about this attribution science and making people worry about more intensive storms, greater amounts of rainfall. Actually, they're just making decisions on their everyday basis, which is, what fits in with my life. I think the second thing is, which will help in making things easier and cheaper, redeploying inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, something that development banks have been talking about for a while. There's a brilliant report by the World Bank called Detox Development, which looks into specific case studies of how this kind of thing can be done, and the Pact to the Future recently mentioned it. And that's a way of kind of flipping the policy environment so that these actions are easier to take. And then the third thing, I think, is communicating the health benefits. So to what Professor Oni was saying earlier, as well as these economic benefits and making things easier and cheaper, it'll also help us breathe cleaner air. It'll also reduce, electric vehicles will reduce noise. Greener cities are nicer for our mental health. They're a nicer environment to live in. So we start talking about the health benefits of climate action and leading with those, perhaps, I think people will be more bought in.
Great, thank you. And if I could just stay with that, because I did say we would be weaving in our conversation some of the work we've been doing over the past 2 years. You are chairing an entity, Clean Air Fund, that is actually was incubated, I think, here. It's one of our longer standing body of work is around clean air. Help us understand what you've been working on over the years and what is that you are planning to produce out of the current term.
I'm leading the Clean Air Fund, which is a philanthropic entity, working on trying to align climate and air quality action for some of those reasons that I talked about before. One of the worst statistics that I've heard this year is that, and to Tolu's point before, about 80% of determinants of health are from our external environment and social factors. One of those is the quality of the air. And unfortunately, air quality is now the second highest risk factor for death. It's just overtaken smoking. So this is huge, and yet it's not getting a big focus, which is a real shame because action to reduce air pollution often is the same as action to reduce greenhouse gases. Not always, so we need to make sure the two things are aligned, and that's what this fund was launched out of work from several young global leaders to do. And that's also the reason behind the Global Future Council on Clean Air. So a couple of challenges that we've been working on in the Future Council. I'll talk about one from the previous term and one that we're working on this time around. One is, whilst we've been seeing a huge increase in the health evidence on air pollution and on the economic benefits of tackling it, we've also seen quite a lot more government regulation over the last few years. We hadn't been seeing a huge amount of corporate action. Corporates were largely missing from the puzzle, and if you were to ask any person on the street about corporate action on air quality, the first thing that would come to mind was Dieselgate, which is the kind of behaviour that is not triggering these positive thoughts about the future. So in the last term, one of the things that our Global Future Council did was incubate a corporate alliance for clean air. We launched it at the COP a couple of years ago along with 10 multinational businesses. And now the forum is the Secretariat running this alongside all of these businesses that joined in. And they're looking to measure their air pollution footprint, which they're doing for the first time. They've produced a guide, integrate that into the regulations that have now come in Europe and India so that there's a level playing field for all businesses using the same methodology, and then target reductions. What we're looking at for this term, one of the things that we're looking at is finance for clean air action and making sure it's integrated. You know, it's kind of easy when you're coming at things from the perspective of a particular issue to just advocate for another silo. You know, we need more air quality funding. And yes, we do. But actually, because it's integrated into so many different sectors, transport, energy, agriculture, it also can be part of those programs. So we have measured the amount of development finance that goes to projects that are looking to reduce pollution at the same time as other things. It's only 1%. And to address this as a council, have produced a manifesto for development agencies and banks to sign on to try and do this integration, and a toolkit for project officers. So if people want to hear more about that, small advertorial, we have a hub session, a spotlight session on it, 2 o'clock in Hub 3.
Great. No, thank you so much. And last but not least for the discussion today, Masoud Ahmed, President Emeritus, Center for Global Development in the US. The global economy, so going back macro a little bit, we are in a low growth environment, 3%. Kristalina Georgieva is warning of the threat of tepid 20s. So people are struggling to figure out how do we relaunch growth, if you will, because we are looking at the levels of trend growth previously were around 4%. So there is this whole discussion around how do we relaunch growth, but then you are, of course, leading a council on the future of growth here that is also looking at not only how do we relaunch growth, but also how do we make it the kind of growth we need. So Professor Schwab mentioned the greener economy, but also, of course, more inclusive. So help us understand kind of your view of where we are with the global economy, but particularly the growth agenda. And I know, for example, you've done a lot of work on the emerging markets, so your views there as well would be appreciated.
Thanks very much, Merrick. So just a couple of points on that. I think the first point is that the sort of year-to-year fluctuations, but if you look at 10-year out growth projections, for the last 10 years, every year we've been marking them down. So our view of long-term growth globally has been one that has been progressively made more and more modest. And that's the concern that people have. Why isn't productivity rising? What can you do to raise productivity? And I think today a lot of hope is pinned on what Klaus Schwab was saying, which is the transition to the intelligent age. And the question really, the big challenge for us is, are we going to be able to capture the potential that that intelligent age brings to be able to transform economies, not only to grow faster, but to grow differently. And that's the other point. You know, what does different mean? And so people like to use terms like sustainable and resilient and inclusive. And you can spend a lot of time talking about this, and our council certainly has. But one thing that is very clear is that we can't carry on with a growth strategy that clashes right into our climate goals. So we have to now find ways of decarbonizing development and growth. And that applies not just to the rich countries, because for them the issue is how you transition your systems. A lot of it is socioeconomic behavior. Climate-like health is not going to be done in one ministry. It's really across the whole society. But a lot of it is also for emerging markets, for whom the future is about growth and material prosperity, but delivered in a way that is going to be very different. And there I do want to make one point, which is, what's holding it up? Why aren't we making more progress on that? The good news is that the technology for green growth is now more affordable than ever. It's really quite extraordinary if you look at the price drop in renewable energy, in solar panels and other forms of renewable energy. But financing costs are very high. So while we have brought down the price of solar panels, the cost of capital, maybe you do that solar project at 4% interest in Germany, you're paying 8 in India, you're paying 12 if you're in Africa. And the same project becomes much harder to deliver. So a big challenge, I think, globally is how do we mobilize financing that is appropriately priced to be able to, and long-term, to be able to help these countries transition and take advantage. Last thing I would say is that, look, in all of this, there's a sort of mainstream group of countries in the world that are making progress faster, slower. But there's also about 30 countries that are fairly low-income countries that are just stagnating. And look out 5 years, look out 10 years. You don't really see an improvement in investment rates and per capita incomes in those countries. Many of them are today paying more in debt service than they spend on health and education combined. So they're not investing in their populations, the young people. So next generation is not going to be healthier, it's not going to be much more educated. And I think we have to find a way of making sure that we deal with that set of issues, because if you have 1 billion people living in those countries 10 years from now that have basically been progressively de-linked from the mainstream global economy and the progress that we see, that is not a recipe for any kind of global stability.
Thank you. If I could just have 2 follow-ups for 2 quick reactions before we wrap up. One is around what you just said. So how do we finance the energy transition and the green transition overall in emerging markets? Obviously, there has been a lot of momentum. We see it with the new presidency of the World Bank. Mr. Banga has been looking at all kinds of things, including how, for example, development banks can work better together to unlock more private finance. We have initiatives from Marconi and others really focusing on the private sector. Some people would tell you that now climate has become an asset class, so there is more capital going, but people would agree that it's way off where it needs to be. Is this enough? Are there other things people are missing, or is it just whatever now is done by the World Bank, etc., we just need to turbocharge it?
I think we have done a lot of diagnosis. We have lots of reports. They all broadly converge on saying the same sorts of things. Where we fall down is the ambition and urgency to deliver. We don't have yet the political ambition, nor do we have the political urgency. It's picking up on the point that you were saying, which is, there's a backlash against climate action in many countries, in rich countries, but there's also not yet the sense of urgency and realization that if 80% of the infrastructure that is going to be in place in emerging markets in the next, say by 50 years from now, is going to be built in the next 15. If we don't make the right choices on the financing and the technology for that infrastructure, we'll be paying the price for bad choices for 2 generations. So I think we still haven't made that political. So that's where I see the shortfall now.
Thank you. And the last question is around industrial policy, particularly, again, from the vantage point of emerging markets and developing economies. There is actually a great debate right now among some economists. Some people are warning that there is great confusion about actually what this could lead to. Of course, some people are warning that a certain form of that led to the kind of beggar thy neighbor dynamic we had between the 2 world wars. Some people would say also we've seen now these shoots of industrial policy, but we haven't really paid the price. For example, in terms of inflation, you mentioned how the prices of clean energy products have gone down, but obviously, as you know, there is this, for example, US-China is a big phenomenon in that regard. So how do you see industrial policy? Are we really looking at repeating mistakes from the past, or can we expect better results?
I think it's quite an interesting area. 10 years ago, the basic narrative on industrial policy, the conventional wisdom, if you like, from the international financial institutions and others, mainstream economists, was that industrial policy is not a good idea. You really want to leave this to the system, the markets, price signals. Governments are not well placed to choose this. Today, all the big countries are competing on their industrial. They're proudly proclaiming that they have an industrial policy and that their policy is better than that of others. The US, Europe, China's for a long time had an industrial policy. So if you're an emerging market finance minister or leader, you're a little confused today. So what should I do now in this world where everybody has an industrial policy? Should I go and get an industrial policy? Can I get, is there a set of industrial policies I can pick up off the shelf? How do I know what is my competitive advantage? So I think the real risk now is that everybody is going to rush into trying to develop and label their strategy as a policy, industrial policy, but there are going to be bad and good industrial policies, successful and unsuccessful industrial policies. So I think we have to move away from a conversation about whether the weather is sorted, it's happening now, to what kind, what principles, what can you learn for different kinds of countries? And I would say that's a conversation for corporates, that's a conversation for the governments, but it's most importantly also a conversation that needs to bring in the broader citizen group, because where we have failed singularly is in communicating and selling whatever strategy for economic development we had. And unless we can bring broader awareness and consensus on what we're trying to do, no policy is going to be able to be implemented.
Masoud, thank you. Thank you so much to all the panelists. We addressed some issues, but obviously we have 30 councils here, so the work is just beginning. So please, just if you can join me for an applause for the panelists. And I wish you a productive 2 days, and this concludes the opening plenary. Thank you.